been all like, I wanna wait 6 months, make sure everything's running smooth, it doesn't take
Yes.
that and stuff like that, and then we can.
Bugs out of it first.
I had a little bit of a scramble, cause I've been updating everything and it hadn't been done, so I had a little bit of a scramble, it's one mess up. On some issues, it's something that it was easy for me to fix, I just didn't want it. So it was on ADP, so I just have to back pay the next check, but you know, yeah, it was a scramble to make sure I had everything right over time.
Sneaking suspicion.
Greg and Paula, it will work.
Well, my feeling is that one of the trustees there is gonna take me out for dinner.
How many times do I have to talk to you about ex parte communication? I hope you're doing all right. I know Paige is planning on being here too, so.
Okay, and have you heard anything from Dave?
So he's actually out of town. There was he was looking at the one place that didn't put today's meeting on the community calendar. And he made plans. He was a little frustrated with me today. And I was like, well, at least I remembered it every place.
I only happened to look in the one place.
I know, it was here.
Not his email, not.
So that one was my fault.
But we got emails sometime.
Yeah, well, I think he checks their stuff,
Oh,
you know, and I think he pops on there, you know, just thinking, well, it'll be on the community calendar if it's going.
yeah.
And it was the one place that I did. Because I can't get away with stuff like that.
In case you're feeling good about yourself today.
You know how that works.
Well, it is 5 o'clock. I think we should go ahead and get started. All right, let's do our pledge thing and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. So you don't even have a roll call on the agenda. Yes, we do. All right, do your thing.
Oh, yeah, because it's good for the record, even though I don't take it. Mayor Bachman?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Knudsen? Trustee Smith?
Here.
Trustee Valentine?
Here.
Trustee Stelter?
Here.
Trustee McCats?
Here.
You don't need a quorum, but
We shall. Yeah, even though we have. All right. So I'm just gonna, what we're gonna do tonight is we're going to let Shay and Andrew take it over. We aren't gonna take public input. There's a written way for the public to do their input, and so I'll do that. All right. Go for it, guys.
All right. If you guys get that presentation going, it's a saying a signal. It's moving. Does it like disconnect after a second? Okay. I'll just dive in. So again, Shay and Andrew, we are Urban Rural Continuum, part of the consulting team hired to do this project. Thank you, Sam and Ruben. Thanks for being here tonight. We're really talking about our draft action plan. And on the next slide, there's a quick agenda. It's short, but there are a lot of questions in there. So I'm just going to do a quick presentation, mostly to just kind of get us all on the same page, a little bit of background, make sure we all know where we are in this project. Then we will do a lot of discussion about this draft action plan. As the mayor mentioned, we're not doing verbal public comment, but there is a sheet for thank you, our one member of the public showing up. Appreciate it. Or if anybody's watching, because we are online, right? Or someone might watch later, there is a link to this feedback page on the town's website. So if you go to the home page, in the blue ribbon on the top, there's a link to like learn about housing or the housing needs assessment and action plan. And on that page, we've highlighted, Ruben highlighted it for us today, where the draft action plan is and this link to submit comments. We're going to collect comments for another week. So till the end of the day, Sunday. So hopefully if anybody wants to comment, they have some time to do so. And then we'll just talk about next steps after lots of discussion. So a quick overview. Thanks, Ruben. Just a reminder, so we are working with Ayers Associates. They're out of the Front Range, but kind of lending us some support with GIS work, some development expertise and such, but they have been in the background. So sorry if they feel like a mystery member of the team. We started this project in the spring. Was it May? I was trying to remember. That's April or May. May. Okay, so it's been a little while now as the fall air is kind of coming down the valley. And this project mostly consists of two parts. So we have this housing needs assessment, and that's really talking about identifying the housing need, the issues that we have in the community around housing. The board reviewed that or looked at that at the last, I believe, right, was the August 22nd meeting. And we are just awaiting final comments on that. We'll get that wrapped up. And then part two is really what we're here tonight to talk about. That's the action plan. So we've given you guys a draft. It's a little more rough draft than the needs assessment was. You'll notice there's some spots that say insert. We didn't want to get too far down the road until we talked with you guys and got some input. The parts where we have insert are like examples or potential funding sources, things that I don't think are as much up for like deliberation and discussion. So we will definitely fill those in and have a complete plan for you next time we bring this to you. But again, tonight we're going to talk about this draft housing action plan, get some direction from you guys so we can start implementation, the really fun part. And hopefully tonight can just be a conversation and discussion, make you guys feel comfortable with the plan, understand what these items are, just get a lot of input and discussion. So when it comes to you for adoption, you're ready for that. And when it comes to implementation, maybe we can even get you kind of a jump start at that part as well. So on the next slide, we just kind of talk about what a housing action plan is. We really want this plan to be a clear and concise plan that helps the community understand how to address housing issues and how to take action. Like any plan, not everybody's going to agree on the exact items and the exact priority. But I think what we are hoping is that we all can kind of live with the plan. It generally reflects the community's, desires and priorities and such, and that nobody's going to actively undermine the plan. It is a plan, which is really a guide. It could sit on a shelf if you choose to put it on a shelf, but we're really hoping it's not that. That it is something, you guys really use as a guide to start taking action. It's hopefully really supportive for you guys, especially as a board member, to say, we have community input, we've done this research, we know based on best practices, so that you guys as a board can feel really a lot more comfortable when you're making decisions or as you take action. Obviously, a lot more engagement will need to happen on every single action item. So as you start, taking care of one item, like updating the code specific to accessory dwelling units, that's going to be another whole community conversation. We are, as part of this project, delivering a first draft of code edits for 4 different topics. So ADUs, short-term rentals, small dwelling unit size, and an expedited review process. So you will have, based on all of the input we've received, our experience and expertise, you'll have a red line of your code saying, this is what we recommend. That will jumpstart that conversation. It won't be perfect. Every community needs to tweak those for what they really feel works. We're trying to do the best we can to get you a really good start based on what we think works, but we are not your whole community. So as you guys go through, you can adjust that. The plan is based on lots of studies and reports. So we have heard, don't recreate the wheel, please read everything we've done. So a lot of input was received from tons of other engagement efforts, planning efforts, a lot of community input, best practices, just experience and knowledge from other places we've worked, communities we've worked with. The community outreach has been, I think, really great. I was so thankful that you guys wanted that in the proposal when you guys asked for services. We had a task force, which was about 12 members, is that right? That helped kind of engage throughout the process and direct us through the effort. We had, which 2 members of the board were on to help provide that link and connection to everything else that's going on. So that was really helpful. We did interviews with builders, realtors, property managers, just one-on-one phone conversations to understand what their perspectives were, what their issues were. We had calls with and emails exchanged with existing service providers. So that's where that existing resources document comes from. That's on the website of, what does the Delta Housing Authority do? And what can they do? We did an employer questionnaire. We had an open house event, and we did a bunch of targeted outreach meetings. So it's kind of a lot, an impressive amount of engagement. Overall, we counted it up because it was kind of fun. We got detailed input from about 150 community members. And detailed meaning not like one section, like 1 second in passing conversation, like a sit down, at least a few minutes with like 10 minutes with each individual, if not like an hour or more. So it's pretty cool to have that input. Let's see. And then we put this little graphic in the presentation because I feel like it gets a little scary to make these decisions sometimes. And what we heard was, some of these items have been in discussion for a while now, like ADUs. And nothing has quite happened yet. And we just wanted to kind of reiterate, this is in the plan, that we really want to focus on plan. That's what we're doing now, but then act. And then monitor and learn throughout the process, revise, and kind of start over. So you may or may not get something perfectly right the first time, but do it, take your best shot, and often you can go back and change it or revise it or tweak it. Sure, maybe one property is developed in a way that you're like, oh, well, wouldn't have done that again, but like that's one property out of the whole town. And you learn and you adjust accordingly. So just don't let the kind of analysis paralysis set in and get stuck in reviewing every possible option and every detail of what could be done. Try to make a really good educated decision. Hopefully we get you a lot of that information to do that, and then we'll move forward. A couple terms that we use a lot just to know of: affordable. So affordable is for housing is when no more than 30% of a household's gross income before taxes is spent on housing costs, including your utilities. So if someone makes $30,000 or someone makes $100,000, affordable to those 2 different people is different because it's a percentage of your income. And then we talk about housing for the community. That term is used a lot in our action plan. And that is really talking about dwelling units occupied by residents who live and or maybe work in Paonia. The intent is that you provide housing for the community that meets all these different range of rental and ownership, different prices, and as households change over time, right? As you're a young single person, your housing is different than when you're a family, than when you're aging, an empty nester. So kind of trying to keep Paonia a vibrant, complete community is that whole housing for the community term. So as you see that, kind of keep that in mind. The next slide is just a quick outline of the action plan. So keep in mind, this is part 2. So we do have an introduction, a part 1, which is that needs assessment. We have this action plan, what we're talking about tonight, and then like appendices that are for the whole project. But tonight we're focusing on this action plan. The overview kind of explains how to use the plan, which is a lot of the stuff I just talked about. Some housing production goals, which we'll talk about later today, and then common themes. So these were kind of fun to put together. They were items that kept coming up during our conversation with various community members, and those are in the pink box on the screen here. So focus on locals. There was a lot of like, we care about our people. We want our future created by us and for us. And that's great. I love that. Maintaining the community character, the importance of not just like totally changing the way Paonia looks and feels. Using this water tap moratorium as an opportunity. There's a lot of challenges, obviously, that come with that. You guys as the board know that better than anybody. But there's a real opportunity that while development is very limited, that you get rules in place, you get things shaped up to how you want them to be, so that when that opens up, you're prepared and ready and know what's going on. And then also leveraging the town's capacity. So just addressing housing issues alone can be a huge lift. There's not a silver bullet that solves all issues. And the town has a lot of other responsibilities, as you guys know, right? You deal with a lot of stuff. So this shouldn't be, all on the town. So we do kind of try to focus on things that don't come with a high administrative burden. Things that you can do with like collaborations and partnerships, and really leverage what exists or potential to create something with, other organizations. Okay, so that's the overview. And then the actions is really the meat and potatoes of the report. So that's what this little graphic is. We have actions to start now that are kind of your start now, do these in the first 2 years, start next, do those in the years 3 to 5, and then future actions, which are kind of the 5+. There's a lot of different things you can do to address housing, so keep that in mind. But these really are tailored to the community. We've kind of started hearing the same input over and over again, which is great. It's pretty consistent. But we will go through those tonight. That's the most of our conversation is talking through those actions. There is a section on land use regulations review. So this was just a request that this be included in the plan. And it is our code review of everything we see that you could change to help with housing affordability. Now, everything in a code could affect something else. So you may or may not choose to do those items. That's fine. But it's just the laundry list of items you could do. You could address those. And again, more conversations will have to happen to figure out what of those you want to do or not. And then there's a section on the potential housing development. So this contains potential development sites, really just publicly owned sites, whether it's the town or the school district, but publicly owned sites, potential funding sources, and then a sample strategy for the development of an actual affordable housing project. We will be talking about all of this today. And just keep in mind, this is a plan. So nothing's committing you to anything. We're not picking a site to develop a project on. We're not saying we're developing it in this particular way. We're not saying we're changing the code exactly this way tonight or in this plan at all. But we are setting a guide. We are kind of agreeing, yes, this is the way we want to go forward as a community, and setting that plan. And it's okay if things evolve and change as you go. You might change something that feels really big and impactful and affects how you do the next thing. And that's great. No problem with that. Anything I've missed, Andrew?
Just one thing to point out in terms of the community engagement that we did. I think you mentioned it in passing, but the employer questionnaire that we put out, we had kind of an amazing response to that. So we got feedback from 50 employers who operate here, most of them in the town, some just adjacent to the town. And those employers represent 500 local employees. And a lot of the needs assessment work is built on that feedback directly in terms of the needs of your business community and keeping people employed and keeping your economy running. So I think that's another kind of critical component to the outreach that we did here, just to add on to all of the other open housing discussions that we had. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, that's great. So we'll kind of dive into the discussion here on the next slide. Thanks, Ruben. So the actions, again, there's a lot, there's a decent amount in there. The plan really focuses on what the town can do. This is not to mention that other organizations are out there doing their thing, which is great. And partnerships and collaborations are wonderful and can be very effective. The actions in the plan include The first set of actions, the actions to start now, try to include a lot of detailed information. So we'll fill in an implementation table of like steps to take, a proposed timeline for that, some funding options. The actions to start next will include a little less detail because you're not going to get to those soon, likely. So all of that might change by the time you get there. Excuse me. And then the actions to start next, or the future actions, are really just a table and kind of a list of actions. What I'm hoping to talk about tonight are really the actions to start now and the actions to start next, so that we can get in there. So the actions to start now, in case anybody doesn't have a plan right in front of them, are regulate short-term rentals, allow for accessory dwelling units, explore public-private partnerships to build housing for the community, establish a partnership for a sweat equity program. That's like a Habitat for Humanity kind of program. And then the actions to start next are updating land use regulations to remove barriers and add flexibility. That is purposefully after regulating short-term rentals and allowing for ADUs, because those are clearly the priority. And we thought doing all the other updates should not waylay or delay those conversations. The next one was aligning community infrastructure investments, then utilize, promote, and build on existing resources, and acquire land or bank land. So the first question we wanted to hear from you guys is, do these general action items align with what you've heard and what you think the community supports? And how are you feeling about those?
I agree. I think absolutely the short-term rentals and the ADUs, that has come up over and over.
Any surprises for you guys?
I was surprised at the response from the employers. I didn't think there would be nearly that much response. It took a while to go through those, and all of the others. And it seems like, just like you said, that everything is everybody has pretty much the same ideas. We need to get some affordable housing, but nobody seems to have a solution. So we're going to have to come up with that ourselves. And this is what this whole thing is for. We do need some affordable housing, and it would be nice if it was efficient, affordable housing as well. Very, not LEDs necessarily, but definitely low energy input. And I would like to see solar panels put on anything that comes up, any future development, because electricity is going to continue to get more and more expensive, and we can bank electricity should somebody decide to get an electric vehicle. That is an energy bank. And if they charge their car during the day, bank that energy. We didn't have to actually buy it through DMEA. And it lowers the requirement for the DMEA. And that's good for us too. So there's quite a few things that we really need to look at and push hard. So I'm really pleased we've gotten this far at this point.
Well, and I think especially the first two sections, what to start now and what to start next, I agree with. I think one piece that might be missing from how it's being discussed now is really starting to tie it to what level of need does this start to address, right? So we identified the need for different types of housing within our senior community. We have more single family homes. So I think really starting to draw that line of like, okay, we're going to allow for ADUs, but why are we specifically doing that? And kind of what do we hope that to address? Because I think that'll start to inform, how we allow for ADUs. And really the intention behind that. But yeah, I think there is, and a lot of it is there. I mean, the partnership with Sweat Equity is great. It's like, okay, well now we're allowing like younger single family home buyers to start to gain equity and build off of that. Yeah, And I think, I wonder if there's room for us to tie a sweat equity program directly to folks who have skills in that field. So I'm thinking like builders, plumbers, electricians. Because one of the issues when we start talking about housing around here is there's no one to do the work. You know, you can want to build something, but it'll take you 6 months to a year to get it started. And so if that first started now, if we're able to attract people who have those skills, who can actually buy and or build that home and start to build equity, then we have those skills in the valley to leverage when we actually want to start building homes. And so like how do we create a program that will actually start to attract, you know, more plumbers, more electricians, more builders, and or keep the ones we have? Because we have a couple of, you know, builders who are around my age who are starting families who don't have any equity in this valley. And that's kind of a fragile situation for us as a community to be in. So I'm really excited about the opportunities of some of those programs.
I'm sought asylum as a refugee from the West Coast, in the housing situation there. So I saw this coming. Now, hopefully at this point, everybody can say they see this coming. It's about time. Anyway, I wanted to, the question is feedback about our community and what we know, but I'm gonna broaden it a little bit because what's happening here is not a new story at all. Anyway, what I was gonna say was the Denver Post, I would say at this point daily, has articles about this very issue and what small towns are doing about it. Part of it is a Denver thing, part of it is a Western Slope thing, part of it is a rich ski town thing. But what does come up is the problems and the solutions have a whole lot in common, no matter where you are. So, and then also it's such a big issue that the New York Times did a really large article. What was it, 2 Sundays ago? You nodded your head, you saw that.
I think I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, on Colorado.
Yep.
And a lot of it was on the western, areas like us. So my point is that this report was a very good match for the problem and the solutions as I've been watching it unfold, for the last 4 or 5 years in Colorado, as presented by the Denver Post and the Times and all kinds of other people, writers on the range and whatnot. So that's, I was really pleased to see that that sort of ground truth, worked out and very nicely.
That's great. So I have a couple things to weigh in on. I think what you've put together really does capture Paonia and the needs and what the community is talking about. But I have a couple questions about the start now action items and ones to start later. So my first one is we really cannot start, we could start doing draft code for ADUs, but we certainly can't permit any yet until we have the water moratorium figured out. So I'm not sure, I'm hoping it could be done by 2 years. I don't know the status of the data collection by our engineers. So I don't know really where we are on trying to determine how much water we have. And then we have to have the discussion of how many taps would we actually make available. So I feel like the ADU is almost should be closer to the 2 to 3 year. Because again, without the ability to give people a tap or a meter, we can't add any more structures, whether it's we rezoned to R2 or not. So that's a little bit of a concern for me on timing. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is one of the action items that you had for year 3 to 5 were pertaining to the resources available to people. And it seems to me that some of these we could start working on. getting people aware of the home repair and modification programs that are out there. There's no reason we couldn't help people start getting repairs to their existing homes, because we did hear a lot about older people being in a house that's falling down around them, and they can't afford to move, and they can't afford to fix it. So that home repairs and modifications seems like one that we could start working on right away. And in some ways, I don't think it would hurt to start working on several of these other provisions to get people aware when we do get to the place where there's new rental units available or homes to be built, they're already aware of what's out there. Because this two-page list is really invaluable to me for the different programs people can go to help repair their house. So I would almost suggest either all of this get moved up or pieces of it get moved up, just so we get started educating people. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is, I don't know if you can address it in this, but I think it would be really nice if people understood what Habitat for Humanity actually does and how they partner. And I volunteered with the one in Cheyenne. And the first thing you have to have is land. Habitat has to have a place to build the house. And then they go through a very rigorous application and review process to decide if people will qualify for a home. And that takes time, but I think it's a really great program, and I have no idea how they're doing in Delta, the city of Delta, or wherever this fledgling one is, and I think it's relatively fledgling. But it might be nice if we could find out more about it. And thirdly, if we could find out more about the Delta Housing Authority. You know, this is all brand new to me. I've never been involved in housing, and I think it'd be really helpful if we knew what they actually can do to help us with this issue, and maybe make more people aware of what it takes to get a housing voucher. And I know, which might be beyond the scope of what you all were asked to do, but I think it's something we should think about to start educating people on what is already there, that they could maybe get a voucher. And thirdly, I think that's three, I don't know who is offering housing vouchers in Paonia.
Delta Housing Authority.
But I mean, who actually owns the roof?
Oh, right.
How many are there actually available, and how much of a waiting list is there? Wanting to know how reasonable it is to think that someone actually could use their voucher because there's a place to go, if that makes sense. You know, these are just, anyway. And if I can ask one more thing. So I'm always focused on the qualifying strategies, which we will have to have identified and buttress when we go to get grants for funding for housing. I'm looking at Mary because you know more about this than I do. And I don't know if, I did not see particular qualifying strategies identified in either part of the report. And I didn't know if first had we asked for that in the proposal, and if that is something you generally do, is provide a town like ours with those qualifying strategies that are most accessible to us, that we can then use to try to get incentive grants from Dole or whoever, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'll try to remember, but remind me if I miss.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. So on the ADU thing, that's an interesting thing to talk about. So I think that's one of those items you could look at in multiple ways. I think the way it's in the plan right now is start talking about it and allow for them in your code. So basically determine what is right for you guys in all zones, and no, in only this zone, do you want to set a size limit, that kind of stuff, and get that into your code. Because there could be someone that could do it without a tap, meaning they already have what they need tap wise to be able to have an accessory dwelling unit. So I guess in the way it's drafted now, the idea is have that conversation now and prepare for it. Do the best you can to amend the code in a way that seems like it makes sense. But if in the next 2 years, you learn something different that says we can't provide this many taps, or we need to be very strategic about where taps are, then you might have to revisit that. But generally, ADUs are a really easy there are not a lot of impact on existing infrastructure because they are small, infill homes. So I mean, I could see it going either way, Paige, where it's, it's kind of, let's talk about this later item, or let's do the best we can to kind of get prepared, have this discussion now, since it's been happening for years. I got Sam's file on, on some past research, and some of those dates were kind of a while ago that this was being discussed. So yeah, I don't know if that helps answer that, but I could kind of see it going either way.
And I tend to agree with you, Shay. It's that, and I've brought this forward a couple of times, is that you can put the structure in place. You can make the ordinance change and whatever, put it in place, change the code. And you just don't allow them until the water moratorium is done. It's all there, and you still say, yeah, the ADU is allowed and it's allowed in this space and here's all the requirements. But until the water moratorium is lifted, you can't do it. Yeah.
And to tap onto that, no pun intended. Tack onto that. There are a lot of taps that have already been purchased in town. And I think it would help if we had a census of those. And why did that person buy the tap? Is it because they're waiting to build a second unit on their existing property? Is it because there's not that many vacant properties in the town of Paonia? So it seems like, because what you said made sense. We do have, I forget the number of taps.
There's 93 standby taps. And I don't think if they're within the town, or there's just 93 residential standby taps, and some of them may be outside.
Right, but I think there are a number in town. And
Two.
you know of two?
Yes.
Right. Oh, yeah, there's two up on Box Elder at
Okay.
Lane.
Anarga
Taps.
has one too.
Yeah,
And those are available right away
right.
to build an ADU. So if we kick it and get that, not kick it down the road anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Get it
good
done.
point.
yeah.
Because there's at least two that I know of, and the lots are big enough to build a auxiliary ADU on.
Right.
I'm thinking of one, it would become the front house, but
You have a garage that already has an existing tap in it, and yeah, everything is already set up in that garage. All you have to do is convert it. So it seems to make sense to me to go ahead, get that legislation done, have it ready. We don't have to do anything with it. Yeah, but it's there. It's ready to go. Yeah, go ahead, Warren.
Well, and I also think kind of attached to the questions of ADU is really the question of the land use and rezoning. Because I think when we do that, we will probably kind of within the legal structure, open up a lot of space that's not currently zoned for that type of structure. And so like, once we have the ordinance structure in place for ADUs to be built, then we can really talk about, okay, what density do we want? And start to zone for that level of density. And I think, yeah, maybe not putting the cart before the horse, being like, okay, how much density do we want? Okay, now let's talk about ADUs. I mean, yeah, I think having that ADU discussion really kind of, because that informs the kind of rezoning and density question as well.
If I could just add on what discussion took place at our last housing task force meeting, which were considerations of if somebody has an ADU on their property, do you impose a requirement that the homeowner has to live in the house, the original house? And so those are questions that were being brought up during our task force, which obviously are questions that would be done during, a session. But those are the kind of things that some people are worried about. And I think it's all about absentee landlords or big investors coming in and buying up houses and property. But I just want to throw that out, that was something I had never thought of that would be of concern to people. So that may come up during the code rewrite.
But doesn't that kind of fall under short-term rental versus ADU?
It can be both. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you have a long-term rental on your property, You know, for instance, we own the property next door to us, which has a small house that we're doing a long-term rental on, but there is room for an ADU. But if you made the homeowner live in the other house on that lot, on that property, I wouldn't do an ADU because I don't want to live in that house. I live next door in my own house. So, and that was what I brought to the Housing Task Force. So my point of bringing this up is we have to really be thoughtful about unintended consequences of trying to address a problem, a perceived problem, which is actual, you know, people buying a property for investment and then not necessarily being part of the community or taking care of it versus, you know, an unintended consequence where who I'm willing to put an ADU on that property, but if I have to live in the little house, I'm not gonna live, you know, it's just my point. Okay.
Yeah, good point.
Yes. And so then there are interrelationships between how you regulate ADUs and how you regulate short-term rentals. To try to address that.
That kind of brings up a question on rentals. A lot of rentals in this town are, to put it mildly, substandard. I think we need to address rental regulations and possibly have a register of, if you're renting a place, it has to be registered and it has to be inspected the first time. And then maybe every 5 years or whatever, whenever the code changes, we have to re-inspect it. Because I know some places, at least one for a fact, they have extension cords that are looped on the ceiling and running on the floor. And it's a scary thing. Somebody's going to die. It's a health and safety thing. And we have many, many rentals in this area that have never been inspected at all. They were converted, some of them. And we have a lot of other buildings that somebody takes their garage attached to their house and they make an auxiliary dwelling unit in it. It's walled off from the house. It's safe that way. But we just lost 2 or 3 parking spaces. And on many streets, they're very, very narrow. If you put, say, a dozen more cars on that street, now you can't get through there with the fire trucks. Oak is one. The ambulance has trouble coming through there. And when we stop in front of a house, because that's where we have to stop, we block traffic there. It's done until we are done and get them out of there. And sometimes when it's difficult, it's a half an hour. So that street is closed. We need to think about that too. And parking spaces for any ADU. Our current regulations call for 1.5 parking spaces for a 1-bedroom unit. A fractional unit doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And pretty much if you have 2 people living in that 1-bedroom apartment, they have 2 cars. And putting more cars on the street really hurts us more than anything else. So we're going to have to do some off-street requirements for parking. And again, we get into that thing where you can buy into the parking co-op and we build a parking lot within 300 feet of the dwelling, which means that another dwelling has to come down or whatever. But it needs to be addressed.
Subway system.
Parking garages on every block.
So I do want to address a couple more things that Paige had questions on, and then yours is on the list as well. The existing resources. So that's an interesting one, Paige. You had mentioned, you know, there's all these existing resources that, why wouldn't we start that now? How do you guys feel about that? Is that something you feel like you'd want to bump up to the start now category? I mean, I'm kind of with you, Paige. I was surprised that didn't get more traction just because it's a fairly low administrative burden. It's kind of working with a partner, helping, or all of the different partners, and just promoting what they have. In terms like there's weatherization and rehab money that I'm sure a lot of residents just don't know it exists. And you could take it as far as little as you want. I mean, you could just work to publicize that document, you know, post it on Facebook, have it at the front desk, have a meeting about it or something, or just, I mean, you can take it really far and have, I don't know, someone sit down and help people fill out applications or something, but how do you guys feel about that one?
Yeah, it seems like low hanging fruit if you can do it. I wonder if there's a partnership with the library that we could do.
Oh, that's interesting.
To be able to have them have somebody be able to help people Library.
Or at least a place where information's posted.
And there's a computer there. I mean, normally that is a good place where people can fill things out.
And even, maybe we could think about in our budget to give them a small amount of money to help fund some kind of information thing at the library.
That's in your long term, is trying to set up a clearinghouse of sorts.
Yeah.
As a staff person. Not as assigned to do it, because and that, I believe that was later.
That was
in your
later.
longer term.
Yeah, it's kind of like one-stop shop, I think is what we call it, where someone could actually be available at all times to answer questions, update that document, share it, kind of be the clearinghouse.
But it seems like that would be a good collaboration with the agency.
For sure.
That would take some of the workload off the staff, right? Actually, if you could give them money and let them do that, then help publicize it.
So sounds like maybe do move that one up to start now.
Yeah, at least on a limited basis, sounds good.
I mean, there's no, by putting it in the plan under start now, there's no like, you have to promote all of these items or, do anything, but that's great. And we could try to reiterate that in the plan of, you don't need to start all of these right now, but like pick a couple that feel like really easy, or maybe you have a partner that's willing to promote that one thing or help with that other thing, and work on that. So we can definitely move that up.
And the nice part about Section 8 vouchers is wherever you're going to rent. Because I had a Section 8 voucher when I was going to school. They come in and inspect the place, so it has to be.
I was actually getting ready to say that because I managed the Creek Vista apartments, and I was like, that's actually a really good starting point, because by the time the moratorium is lifted, a lot of these people who need their houses remodeled or maintenance done and stuff will actually have the option of being able to accept a housing voucher.
True, yeah.
Yeah, I would just add to your question about like a census of, who has a qualifying residence to accept vouchers. I don't know for sure if the housing authority has that already, if they would have access to it, but we can certainly help connect you with those folks. I definitely talked to numerous landlords who do accept vouchers in town. So it is out there and possible, and they are all ready to accept them. So if there is someone who has a voucher in hand and they're renting.
And if I remember right, I think there were like a handful of location-based vouchers, meaning they stay at Creek Vista. And then there were a handful of kind of floating vouchers that are also at Creek Vista. And then the other like 20 are throughout your community.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I know at Creek Vista, we had a certain percentage of them that had to be in the low percentage of the housing rate, and then the next one up, and I think there were 2 or 3 units were allowed to go up full market value, and but the rest of them had to be in certain percentage.
Yeah. It's great. You also made me think, Paige, of one of the potential steps or implementation steps we could put in here is having a presentation or work session or discussion with the Delta Housing Authority. The woman who runs it is very well versed and experienced. And when I spoke with her, she was like, tell people to call me. I'll talk anytime. Like she just wants to help and do great stuff. So that could be a really good kind of first step of this. Promote, build on existing resources, is understand what she does, understand if you could promote more people to be housing choice voucher landlords, and what that looks like. Because I've heard from some landlords like, man, it's solid rent. Like, oh my God,
Absolutely.
Gets paid.
yeah, it gets paid. Like you get the inspection, sure, you have some rules to follow, but like it can be a really good thing. So maybe even a session of, anybody curious about being one? Come learn what that means and understand that. So maybe there's another 2 people that do it in the community, right? That'd be great. Okay, awesome. We'll add that. And then the DOLA's qualifying strategies. So a great question and a little complicated. So stop me if I'm like really confusing in this. So the qualifying strategies that DOLA has are part of what you guys are supposed to address with this project. And this project somewhat addresses them, it starts them, but it does not finish them. And the ones you guys picked were ADUs, short-term rentals, small housing size, and expedited development review process. And I could show you what they are in there, because they're of course different language on that sheet.
In here,
No, that sheet has like very specific language, but that,
but they're in here, just maybe not worded the same way.
they're kind of in here. So we had this discussion at the start of the project of, this is not 100%, this project that we are doing is not 100% taking care of those. Those will be taken care of when you actually start having the conversations, like to adopt new code language. The idea is that you have to make your best effort. So if you guys start talking about something like ADUs and you realize like, that is just not for us, this isn't gonna work, we're gonna do something differently, that's okay. You kind of went through the process, you talked about it, you figured it out. That's my understanding of what DOLA wants, is like a good faith effort of actually talking about this.
You're not gonna come back and take our grant money away from us.
No.
But do we need this for future grants?
The grant that was tied to this program has expired. So to apply for that other grant, we would have had to make some progress on those. Since that program has now disappeared, the requirement for that has now disappeared.
Oh, so these qualifying strategies are good for us to think about in our housing, but we're not gonna be held to these unless something changes in next granting, when we try to get money to build something or whatever.
No,
Okay.
that is not tied to any future grant program.
And my understanding is it could help.
Yeah.
So I don't know that they're gonna be like, what did you do? Show me exactly. But by saying, we did take that grant, we looked at these items, these are in our plan, this is in the hopper, we've done that one. I think it can only help you.
Okay.
Okay, I think that was all of your stuff. Does that sound
Oh, and the
like I got
second,
your items?
yes, the only other one I was interested in was the Habitat for Humanity.
yeah.
Delta, and how they're doing, and
Yep.
they have the capacity to go beyond City of Delta.
So there are two different Habitats for Humanity that cover this county, which is kind of unique. So Habitat for Humanity of the San Juans is based out of Montrose, and they also cover this area. But they do not do building projects here because Habitat of Delta does that. So we tried to explain it a little bit in that existing resources, like Habitats, I don't know exactly what they call it, maybe it's weatherization and rehab, maybe it's not, but they have a funding program of existing homeowners do things like get a new roof. Yeah, okay, thank you, it is on there. So the Habitat of the San Juans out of Montrose has some programs that cover here. The building piece is the Habitat Delta. They are, I believe it's like one person, not super active. The Habitat of San Juans is super active. So the Delta group, I only was able to exchange emails with the person who runs that, and they have a partnership with the Elevation Land Trust. They're out of Denver, the Front Range, really fascinating land trust that's doing work all over the state. And they have formed this partnership, and I don't know exactly the status of it as of today, but the partnership was to buy up kind of older, somewhat rundown houses and rehab those houses. So instead of Habitat's traditional model is build new, and this is kind of a new model that they're starting with this Elevation Land Trust to buy older houses and fix them up. And so part of your sweat equity and the whole program is fixing them, remodeling it rather than building from the ground up, which we thought would be a really interesting model here in Paonia, where we do have a lot of substandard housing or just old. I mean, it's just been around a long time and needs some love. So that was just a really interesting and exciting one that felt like, that could be something that you guys actually contact them and start the discussion and see what that would take to do. I don't know that we can put a ton in the plan page about like all of habitat stuff, mostly because we don't know that, and I don't want to get into the weeds because it might change or evolve. But that could be another session of,
Particular for us.
Yeah,
to address, yeah.
or get the gal or someone from Elevation Land Trust to come and explain what they're doing, or if they ever do that with anybody else, or have a handout or something, to see what, what your role could be in it as a community, because maybe the local land trust here would want to partner, there could be something that you guys are the matchmakers and help the connections be made, but it's not like a big resource lift for you.
I don't know enough about the Telluride Foundation to know if they would do a sweat equity program as well with the housing things that they've been doing.
Yeah, as far as I know, they're not doing sweat equity programs. They're building new.
Well, they're doing
I
modular.
don't know of one,
Yeah.
but are you thinking of what is now Rural Homes? It's a spin-off of Telluride? Yeah, so they're
Oh, yeah.
building new.
Okay.
But yes, it is modular.
Modular.
Yeah, Habitat for Humanity is now doing modular duplexes too.
Nice. Okay, I think we got everything. Okay, yeah, and then Rick, you were talking about kind of rentals being substandard. This was kind of a complicated topic for us, and I'm sure it is for you guys too. We kind of felt that is really an administrative item and a town item to figure out how to address substandard housing. Some of this, what's in there, could start to address that. The weatherization and rehab, grants, the sweat equity program, maybe getting these houses that are really in bad shape bought up and totally rehabbed would be really helpful. I think a little bit of it is, enforcement capacity, and sometimes those efforts can kind of, I guess kind of go against affordable housing when you crack down as a community and say every house has to be up to code and every rental unit has to meet certain standards. You can lose a lot of units. Not that I'm assuming you guys as a community want anybody living in anything that is unsafe by any means. You don't want to condone that and promote that. But we kind of intentionally didn't get into that too much, feeling like you guys have been talking a little bit about enforcement, and that's something for you guys to navigate, to be frank.
Lucky us.
But if you have ideas of how we could integrate it a little bit more, or, address it a little bit in a fair way without saying like, we're going through town and inspecting everybody's dwelling unit. Let's talk about that and see what ideas we could come up with.
One thing that would be really good is to get a census of rental units in town. Start there. And what that does is we know what we have for rental units. And it kind of gets us to the next point where we have short-term rentals. We don't see, if we know it's a rental now, and then all of a sudden it's now a short-term rental, we know we've lost that. And it's another step towards getting that regulated and possibly getting some fees that we could use to increase the housing stock by town action. If we have some funds, perhaps we can make it so that a water tap is not hugely expensive, or we can give them a discount on fees for development. There's a lot of things we could do with a little bit of money, but short-term rentals are a real problem at this point, and we definitely have to hit that hard.
Number one on the list.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess we've kind of talked through most of these, the priority levels. We're going to adjust a little bit here, add the utilize, promote, and build on existing resources to the start now. How about the priority of any others? Would you guys move any of those around?
Oh,
Could I make a suggestion? So when I was reading this, I had to keep thinking, where am I? Am I still reading in the 1 to 2 year, or am I reading under the, whatever the next, the 2 to 5? So if there's some way to maybe put something in a header or footer, so I could keep track.
Yeah,
And you did have the list in the table of contents of what's in there,
yep.
but I didn't want to keep going back and
What
forth.
does this header say?
This
Oh,
just
part
says
two.
housing, part 2 housing action plan. So let me go to the
I need
table
to
of
fix
contents.
those. Yep, that's great. We can definitely do
And
that.
maybe even a little introductory to each of those 1 to 2, that lists, these are the bullets you're about to read about. So you kind of can see everything that's in that particular timeframe, and then do the same, because I just found myself going back and forth.
You bet.
Trying to check where it was.
Yeah. Anything to make it easier to like read. That's great.
Look at the table of contents to see what is under each one.
Scrolling very fast.
Let's see.
Yeah, first is regulate short-term rentals, second is allow ADUs. Third, explore public-private partnerships to build housing for the community. And fourth, establish a partnership for sweat equity program. Number 5, under that section, will now be utilized, promote, and build on existing resources. If that's where you want that, we could put it higher if you want. I don't know that within each section, there's really, much difference for you guys. We did kind of put them in order of priority, but not like to that minutia of like, start this one on month 1 and that.
Right.
It's a plan.
Yeah.
The other thing is that since there is so much money currently available for land banking, and I'm not sure how long that money is gonna last, that might be worth moving up as well.
I laugh because we had this discussion internally, and there's a note in there in the plan that says specifically, land banking is one of those things that when the opportunity comes up, you just need to do it. So that I'll check and make sure we have good language in there. But I think specifically that one we tried to call out because that's one that, sure, maybe you're not pushing for it and fundraising for it. But if grant money comes around, that's all of a sudden the top of the list to, buy property.
Yeah,
That's the big grant that CML was offering up, talking about from the IRA, the
Yeah.
inflation.
Was that proposition
Between
1, 2, 3?
tiered.
Is that like proposition?
It's this year, it's next year for sure.
That's gonna
It's
be easy
funded
coming
this year
through.
and next year.
Like you said, gone.
right.
Is that what we signed up for?
No.
We made the motion for
Yeah.
Stefan to go ahead with proposition 1, 2, 3.
That was part 1, and then last board meeting, we did another part of that it was yes, I can see the document, I can't find the word, but yeah, it was part in Colorado West Land Trust to make a proposal on buying, it was a pre-proposal on buying some of that Evo's land. Yeah, because we did that letter of interest on that, and that's part of going ahead for that land trust money as well.
Okay, which is not necessarily under proposition 1, 2, 3.
It's part.
It is part.
Yeah, you have to be in 1, 2, 3 to be able to access that.
Yeah, because it seemed like 1, 2, 3, they were saying how many additional units we would have to have over so many years, but it also included money potentially to buy land.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so, and you mentioned it in here, but I was still a little foggy about what it was exactly we were gonna do. Could potentially do by signing on.
Yeah.
So that is a possibility. Okay. So that gets at that.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's kind of tricky to figure out where to put land banking and also the infrastructure investments. It's like, well, we don't actually know specifically when we're gonna start tearing up this infrastructure, but also like keep in mind, if and or when you do,
Yeah.
this also needs to be part of that process, so.
And the other thing about with codes and development is like, I don't know where you would put this or how you would say it, is like, if there is a development requiring that X number of units be set aside for affordable housing. That gets written into the code somehow,
Yeah, so that is generally called inclusionary zone,
okay?
or what's that word called? That's
Inclusionary
inclusionary
zoning.
zone.
Those colonies.
And that, we actually did not recommend for you guys.
Okay,
That is typically a lot more successful when you have a lot of development pressure, which, because you guys have a water tap moratorium and generally your growth has been pretty stable, you don't have that pressure. It can also affect market rate housing. So I come in and say, I want to build 10 units, and you say, well, 2 of those have to be affordable. The other ones just got more expensive. So in a smaller town, those are, inclusionary zoning is generally not found to be a very successful tool. It also requires a lot of labor. You have to do a whole nexus study, linkage study, to make sure that there is a nexus between what you are requiring and what you're asking for and what the impact is to the community. So it's pretty complicated. However, in the code analysis section, I did recommend that as part of any planned unit development, you can negotiate for units. So planned unit developments are not 100%, but basically negotiations. Within certain realms. You can't be like, oh, we want a water park with your tenant. But you get what I'm saying. Like it's a bit of a negotiation. So if someone comes and says, hey, I want to do 15 units on this property that your code only allows 10 units on, you could say, well, that's great. How about those extra 5 have a permanent deed restriction on them for local workers? So there is a recommendation as part of a PUD, you guys could negotiate that. Now that doesn't really go in your code. That's normally a policy item that you just say, based on what is being negotiated. If you want to ask for a bunch of other stuff, maybe you say we want 2 units or something. So that is a way to be able to do that without having this inclusionary zoning complicated thing that can affect other housing.
Yeah, for sure. And then another tool that I wouldn't say often gets used, but could be used, and it's in the future actions table, and that is to create a density bonus program, right? So if someone comes in and you can sort of by right or through negotiation, you could build 10, and let's say you create a density bonus program where you could build up to an additional 20% or whatever, however you write it. Those then you can write into the code that they would be affordable, right? So you can give whoever's building an incentive through building more units. It's just some of them have to be. So there are other tools that can get to the same outcome that are not as complicated. And I think another concern is to the whole, you don't have a lot of contractors, certainly not very many that have a lot of experience building in affordable environments where you're having to manage grants and other federal regulatory compliance requirements. Some of these other tools are going to be easy. And if you go down an inclusionary zoning route, I fear that some of those folks who may be interested in doing stuff and paying.
This is a rhetorical question, but isn't the development industry, don't they have a 40-year track record of weaseling out of building anything at all that anyone can afford?
There are some really, really interesting developers and people doing cool stuff, but
Anecdote.
maybe the minority. People have to maximize their profits, and I shouldn't say they have to. A lot of people, development is a high risk game. You don't know when the market's going to turn. You don't know when lumber prices are going to quadruple on you. So it's so complicated, right? So anybody who develops plans on a big return because it can shrink or go into a deficit at any time. But that's what's cool about what the Telluride Foundation is doing through their rural homes. They're finding investors who are willing to take a much smaller percent return on their investment than what traditional developers do. Or, the loan, like if you get a loan from a bank for a big construction project, they're gonna charge you a lot. But if you reach out to some really awesome individuals that are willing to take a lot less, you might be able to get something done. So that's what's really fascinating to us about this rural homes work that's being done, is they've found people who are, probably billionaires that are just out of the goodness of their hearts willing to not make quite as much money. So I know it's a rhetorical question, but I answered it.
It sounds like we should be very careful about who, in development partnerships, who we work with.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
And that didn't really come across in your response about what was it called, an inclusionary?
Zoning.
Yeah.
Right. So in an inclusionary zoning scheme, right, that would be codified. And so anyone who walks through the door and is asking to build something in town would go through your process, and they would have to comply with that code, whatever it says. So it wouldn't necessarily be in the realm of something like a public-private partnership, right, that is outlined in the plan, and that will kind of do a sample project kind of strategy as part of this plan. We'll kind of detail one way that something like this could come together, right? There's a lot of ways it's done, but in that more traditional, affordable, trying to serve the market that is not currently being served given cost of construction and everything else. Those are the kinds of projects that
And we did try, maybe it should be a little stronger, but in the public-private partnerships section, we tried to explain a sentence in there of like, if you're gonna partner with a developer to actually build a project, you definitely want to be very intentional about who you pick. And because you are a local government, it would have to go out for bid. It would be a public, process. But what was a little bit at odds in Paonia was we heard a lot of people saying, we want locals to build here. We don't want, whoever from Iowa to come and be a developer here. Well, for better or for worse, Paonia doesn't have an affordable housing developer. That is a very specific skill that just doesn't exist in a lot of communities. A project was just developed in the city of Delta, and the developer came from Illinois, I believe. They partnered with the Delta Housing Authority. So the Delta Housing Authority is going to manage it. The grant money went through them. But that one is hard because if you have someone who has the experience, the knowledge, the relationships with banks and funders, the ability to navigate federal tax credits, state tax credits, all this other stuff, they're just few and far between and don't happen to be here, like a lot of communities. So that's one where it's like, it's not supporting that common theme of all local everything, but those are the people who can build the projects that Morgan, you were saying, like who does this serve? Those projects can serve a very low income. They can be the 30 to 80% of area median income and your local workers. So it's like, well, maybe it's worth it in that instant, but if you're ever working with someone, you do have to be very thoughtful about who you're working with and what you're agreeing to and what they're doing, and make sure that you call it references.
yes.
Yeah, we want to be really careful because they have that development in Delta on Stafford Lane, kind of across from Walmart.
No, that's
affordable housing, and it's $2,400 a month.
No, it's not affordable housing. I talked to,
that was
Signed, approved as an affordable house.
That's the problem with affordable housing.
and just to clarify, I was there and the community development director in Delta, so it wasn't, it might have been marketed as affordable housing,
That's what the
but
sign
it wasn't, sure, but that's the developer claiming that. The town, there was no requirement, they did not get grant money. It's all privately funded, a firm out of Utah that built that. But they did claim and ask when they were getting their approvals, like, we're affordable, we're affordable. So everyone was a little disappointed, but it wasn't actually a partnership with the city or anything. But that's how a lot of developers want to get approval. They say, we're coming in and we're building affordable housing.
That's what you want so much for.
Yeah.
Very fine.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of communities are being very careful with. When someone comes and says, oh, I want to do a planned unit development and it's all going to be affordable. It's like, great, how is it permanently going to be affordable? What are we recording against the deeds? What is the agreement? How is this? Because we're not just going to say, oh, awesome, we'll give you some money or pay for your tax or whatever, unless it truly has an affordable component. So that's a good thing to be cautious of and really thoughtful about. Yeah.
So could I ask which, where is the real affordable housing going up in Delta?
Yeah, so do you know where the Delta Housing Authority is?
No.
Okay, so it's on the south side of town, and if you turn in at about 15.
You turn by Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
It's back in there.
Yep, so like if you turn from the main drag on 15th, the road has just been completed. It's a senior project.
All that going on.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's kind of back behind.
yeah, it's really tucked in there, and it's, I mean, it's a big building, so that's
Thank you.
that's
I'll pay
helpful.
more attention now when I drive by.
I just went and drove it. You can actually drive in the parking lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's back a ways.
Yeah.
It's just not right on the main.
Yeah, I
road.
could see it coming from Montrose, that something was going on.
Yeah.
There's a thing, I spent my career out of Aspen and Telluride, and they both had affordable housing, deed restricted housing. And every developer had to have a certain percentage of affordable housing built in it. And if they didn't have that, they had to contribute to the housing fund. And it worked for Aspen, but it can't work here. It's just no way. Because they were building, $6 and $8 million houses or units, and they would build a $400,000 affordable housing. But all of the affordable housing was deed restricted. The amount of money you could sell it for was like 10% plus the rate of inflation. That's it. So people tended to stay in there for a long time, locals, and it was restricted to local workers as well. So to get on there was a lottery, and I got on the lottery in 1989. And just 3 years ago, I got a note that said that I'd come up. I didn't live in Pitkin County.
We don't hold your breath.
So I'm gonna move on to the next slide and kind of topic items, and we can definitely revisit the actions if we have time at the end. So the next section of the plan is this land use regulations review. Again, that is really just our review of the code, giving you a laundry list of things you could do. You can take or leave what you want, but I just wanted to allow some time tonight for any questions you have on that. If it's helpful to explain anything or clarify anything, and no worries if not, it's a really technical item. And unless you've lived in municipal code, it's not super easy to understand. So no worries if there's not a lot of discussion. I think you guys are working on getting a grant to update all of your codes. And this could be something you hand whoever gets that project or reference during even the RFP process for code expert to read and kind of understand.
I had just a couple of questions on some of the draft code, mostly just for edification. And the first one I had was on page 41. Let's see if I can, and that's 41 of the packet. And it had to do with living space. Let me catch up to myself here. We had suggested getting rid of the private living space. Remember where that is? It's on this So in our code, we have a picture of private living, outdoor living space that is required to be associated with a new unit.
I believe it's in your PUD regulations
Yeah.
that says you need like 150 square feet of private outdoor space
Right.
per unit. And I had said that's like super specific. I'm not sure that is necessary. And something you guys can negotiate when you get to a PUD if you want. Does that help?
Yes, but
It should be
what I was
under,
our code also says that you have to allow private living space for the upper stories of a building, which I'm assuming means balconies. And you had said maybe do not require, don't require private outdoor living space
the
for.
only one I
multiple
recall
levels.
seeing, you searched
And I said it was
private.
page 41, but I can't find it right now.
So private is in here, Andrew's searching. It's on the line for
Oh, okay.
16.5.530, F and H.
Yes.
So that is under your planned unit development standard. So only if someone comes and is doing a PUD,
Mhm.
that would apply.
And then
So I must have missed the other one.
oh, no, this is
Okay.
exactly what I was
Okay.
referring to. But when I read it, then I had to go back into the code to get the context. But so essentially consider reducing or removing the private open space requirement.
Mhm.
And that was just for on the ground level, but it sounds like we also require upper level private living space.
Is it in that same section?
Yeah, with balconies. And here it is, right above there. F and H, consider reducing the required open space requirement. Consider reducing or removing the private open space requirement. And when there was something about upper levels where we also.
It's probably in the
required-
code. So like, to me, how I read that is like if someone's building condos, everybody needs that 150 or 120 square feet of like a private balcony, patio, whatever. And
That's what I
your
was wondering.
PUD regulations are the most specific I've ever seen. And I've done a lot of codes.
Mhm.
PUDs are to allow for flexibility. So I called out some of the specific things in there where I was like, this is so specific, why? The benefit of a PUD is it's a planned unit development, it's made for flexibility. Someone comes in with some super cool idea and you talk about it. And if you want at that point to be like, hey, everybody needs some private open space, then you can do that. But I think the whole idea for a PUD is like you could do condos or buildings where nobody has outside space that they have to deal with or maintain. They get to like shut the door and leave on their vacation or not ever do any yard work or anything. So yeah,
This is
exactly.
for people. Well, it was the upper stories that kind of threw me off because our code does say upper stories have to have so much living space, which I'm assuming is balconies.
And that's what I would guess. I mean,
I read that somewhere.
I could see that, back in the day when maybe public housing was built in a terrible way and people didn't have their own private open space, that feels really important, that if you're living in like a condo or a townhouse or something that you'd have private space to yourself. Do you guys need to regulate that in your code? I don't think so. You're welcome to. But yeah, that seemed like very super specific to me.
Yeah.
Because often it's shared space. That's the whole point of a PUD. You have like a playground that everybody shares and pays to maintain together.
And then one more, if I can, one more question on page 43. This is mostly another edification question. It is section 18-12-10, temporary uses. Consider adding a temporary use to include owner occupancy of an RV fifth wheel first on site for up to 1 year during construction. So my question came up, because I don't own an RV or a fifth wheel. Does that mean that they should be hooked up to sewer or can they be self-sufficient?
That'd be for you guys to decide. I would recommend they be hooked up because,
They're gonna live there, so and hooked up to electricity.
yes.
So they'd have all utilities to
Yep.
that unit. Okay, thank you.
And they're gonna get utilities to the lot anyway, so they just do that
Yeah, and then
first.
hook it up. Okay. So they'd be like a pretty nice RV slot.
Right, very nice.
Definitely like the thing about the total number of dogs and cats on one property. Oh, my God.
I came up with the task force.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions on the land use stuff? Okay, so the potential housing development section, this has a list of potential sites. And those are public sites. They are town-owned, school-owned. Mostly, I just wanted to see if you guys have any revisions. That column on the very right in the plan is going to disappear. It's not part of the plan.
I was wondering what page of the packet.
Yes.
That's
44.
Thank you.
So that right column will disappear. I kind of put that in there for context, but are there any sites in here that like should not be included? Like, I don't know what the story is with the library and if those 4 lots that are single family, if there's an agreement for those to remain.
Those actually were, they have flood danger and that bank eroded, so they're not quite large enough. And when we had the flood in 83, there was water in that, on that street. So developing that is probably maybe if and.
So there's, let's be sure we're talking about the right sites. So there are,
On the
like, it's
other
the
side of the street.
end of the 4th.
Right.
So between,
Or are you talking about where they have the gazebo and the
yes.
little park?
Yeah, so there is one site in the list.
Part deeded is library land.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Okay.
And the library would have to give that up, and the library district, I don't think you can negotiate with those people at all.
So they are listed as owned by the town of Paonia on Delta County records. But there is very likely, what I assumed was there's probably an agreement, or like a 100-year lease or.
What we did is, when that land was, I don't think it was deeded to the library district, and that's why we still have a library today. They have to, that library has to be a library. And that's why they didn't close ours when they closed Hotchkiss Cedar.
It's probably a 100-year lease, something like that.
It's a long-term agreement.
Sam, does that, any of that sound familiar to you?
I literally just had to find that document last month for somebody. So it was, I'll find it and share it with you guys, but I know it does say in there that it cannot be sold or used as anything other than a library for the town of Paonia for like, I don't know if it was 100 years, maybe it was like 60 or 70 years, but I'll find the document for you and I'll send it out to you.
Okay. And then based on that, we will probably remove it, is what it sounds like. Okay, that's great. And then, Rick, there was a lot on the river side that is super skinny. Someone had mentioned maybe it was supposed to be like, it would one day maybe be a.
That's where the bridge is.
Yeah, that's where the bridge is gonna go.
Okay, so that one's planned for, is that in like your Paonia motion plan or some other plan? Okay.
And that is one reason it's too small. And the other thing is every time we get a spring flood, it erodes a little bit more.
It's eventually going to.
So,
It's shrinking.
yeah, it shrinks.
Okay.
We need to do something with that. Before, when we build a bridge, we'll do some riprap or something like that, which will alleviate that problem.
That's great. This is just the feedback we were looking for.
Yeah.
What other sites, you guys, did anything else strike you as like that shouldn't be in there? Like,
The Second Street warehouse, the Public Works warehouse. I don't know what the agreement is with the ambulance district, but the ambulance district rents half of that. And they were planning at one time to do some improvements for that. And I don't know what that project, it was discussed and I was very peripheral on it.
Yeah.
So,
Probably another complication of developing that site, move Public Works, you have to notify the ambulance district and make sure that they have space.
right, actually, I think there's a gap between the buildings, a very small gap. But the Public Works warehouse it's one of those, we probably have to tear it down.
Oh, God.
It's cinder block and
And
yeah, it's
probably
it's
have
probably
to-
brownfield as
Right,
well.
exactly.
Yeah, I think some of these, sometimes the stars can align where it's like, we really need a new public works facility or we need a larger facility. So we're gonna move from here. We're gonna go over here to this site. This site opens up for this thing, like town hall to move over. Yeah. So sometimes it can be really interesting to have just like the inventory of sites and know what's owned, so you can kind of play that
Yeah.
game. So I don't know, maybe it's worth leaving that one on, but just noting that
Difficulty.
yeah.
And since I'm part of the ambulance district, I don't know that they would have another place. There's not another building suitable
Yeah.
for them. They need a minimum of 2 bays. And those doors, I'll tell you right now, they're too damn narrow to get a modern ambulance in. It's very difficult to back one in. So, because I do it multiple times a week, and I've been doing it for 26 years, and I'm still having trouble with it. Because there is about 4 inches on each side of the mirrors. That's it.
So maybe you guys need to expand into the
Those doors.
What else, you guys?
I don't know anything about the USFS on Rio Grande.
I doubt
I mean,
That's federal land.
No, and they had the horses on some of that, so you can't move the horses. They move themselves. I'm a horse lover.
That was interesting. That one we listed because you know more about this, Andrew. The Forest Service, or was it specific to the federal government, or just Forest Service, National Parks?
Yeah, it's public lands and Forest Service.
Okay, so all public lands. There was a program for a while to basically land swap because there was a lot of public land that was like, why do we have this tiny little 2-acre parcel right on the edge of town? That's not what we want to be regulating and managing. We want to regulate and manage the forests. So there were, and affordable housing became an issue. This was years ago.
Oh, my God.
It's like 5, I don't know. It was a while ago.
I've sort of lost track of the details and when the statute went in place and if that program is still in play, but we could dig into it, talk to this district.
I didn't remember when Aspen has the Forest Service right on the corner of the entrance of town. And that was a discussion over there. And the Forest Service was very reluctant to give up that piece of property. It's worth millions.
Oh, in Aspen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just as a lot, if you scraped everything off, it's worth several $1 million.
Ours probably isn't.
Well, maybe we can see if that program is still active, because maybe there's at least,
It's
it remains on the list
7 years.
as a potential, to investigate, because it was a really neat program where, it was, some swap, and it was all about affordable housing, and that's, you're like kind of in the middle of town.
Yeah,
good place.
Next to the park and everything.
Yeah.
We can find a home for the horses.
Yeah.
It's Redwood. Come outside. Okay, we better move on. Let us know if you think of anything else with those properties. Okay, so the strategy, we are tasked with developing a sample kind of development strategy. This, after discussion with the task force, we thought it'd be best to kind of use a hypothetical piece of land and not pick a particular piece of land. But what we do want from you guys is kind of what you feel best would be, like, what's a good example to develop? So do you guys want mostly rentals, mostly ownership, a mix? Do you want single family homes or one apartment building, or what in between? Just if we were to model a development for you, what do you guys think the community would most, desire or want for that model? Something that's, somewhat realistic. Affordable housing is not our traditional 6,000 square feet lots with single family homes. We can model that, but it won't be a great example for you. So I feel like we heard a pretty big desire for some ownership component. So I would probably encourage a mix. Is that how you'd say, or maybe more ownership?
Potentially, I think we should talk about it. Yes, and just to clarify, this is intended to be a sample. It's, although somewhat detailed, it is not every last detail you would need to do this. It's to get you thinking about the kinds of things that could occur in the future and how you might put a deal like this together, getting to the, how do we ensure that someone is coming in as reputable and is going to actually, do what they say.
one of the things about making it affordable is generally we're gonna have to have a larger component of multi-unit housing, apartments and rentals. If you're gonna build affordable, single-family homes, they're gonna be damn small. And the problem with that is the land cost, the utilities cost, and right there, it takes it, you're probably talking somewhere in the range of about 70 grand right there before we even break ground, before anything. That's just the basic cost. So, we're probably talking something in the tiny home region and more like a trailer park, but you own your little lot and you own that. And what that does is that's a starter home for people that can get into it. It's never going to sell for $300,000, $400,000, or we hope not. And that's probably what we're going to the ownership component will be something like that. A house that's probably in the range of about 700 square feet, which is pretty damn small. One bedroom at the most. Yeah.
Or senior.
Or senior housing can be, but then multi-units make much more sense.
Well, I'm thinking of fourplex.
Mhm.
Instead of doing single family or doing a complex, like fourplexes, do a thing of fourplexes.
Okay.
Where you would have, some of those units could be to be bought, some of them could be rental units, so that.
One of the things with that is financing. Banks are tremendously averse to loaning money on a fourplex, or a duplex even is difficult, because if one side doesn't keep up their maintenance and whatever, their value on that house goes down and it becomes very difficult. I've tried to finance multi-unit houses, duplex, quadplex, and it's very, very difficult. There's a lot of roadblocks.
It's true. I would, for this conversation, I would encourage a little less worry about the details and where the money comes from and more what you think the community needs. Leave the details to us. We can share how it could potentially come together, unless you propose something where we go back to the folks at AIRS who can sort of model it and just say it can't be done. Then we would need to come back to you. But I don't think that will necessarily be the case. So broader concepts, right? Like single family homes,
Clusters of
clusters of
fourplex.
homes, clusters of
It seems like.
higher density, which is totally true. Scale is important here in terms of bringing the cost per unit down, right? You're spreading the land costs over more, even though in this example, the land is going to be public, but it is still more efficient.
But, looking at the study and how many single family homes we have and that we need more diversity. But I can't see an apartment complex as being really what this town would appreciate or need. It seems like some kind of cluster would be a better thing than an apartment complex versus a whole bunch of new single family homes.
Well, I'm not necessarily disagreeing, but I want to push back a little bit, and I think, and that's to say that an apartment complex is never going to be like an easy sell in this community, but I'm curious about if we put like how we can re-envision what that apartment complex is. And so I think there is a lot of a fear around a very high density building like that because of all the examples that we've seen in the past. And so like, what is an example that could perhaps change some of that? Not that I'm recommending that we put all our resources right there, but just as a thought exercise of like, okay, well, there are definitely reasons why we're shying away from that, but are those reasons informed by, what we've seen in the past, or are they informed by like, that's actually not kind of where we want to go? I'm not sure. Because honestly, like I live down the street, I wouldn't necessarily call it a complex, but I live down the street from the apartments at the end of Grand, and I forget that they're like when I'm thinking about our housing, I don't often think like, oh yeah, I actually live 2 blocks away from the closest thing Paonia has to an apartment complex. So
One off Main.
Yeah, the one
Off of Main on the south side of town. Yeah.
And so I wonder if there's ways that we could re-envision what that looks like that could integrate into the town. I don't know.
Design is important.
Designs, yeah.
Design is important. Is there just in general terms, is there a threshold in terms of your vision of a number of units that might feel too big, too dense? Generally, very generally, like 30, is that too dense?
For apartment buildings,
Like for one building.
12 or less is probably for our community size. That's just my opinion. I threw it out there.
When you said a fourplex, were you thinking where you have 2 apartments on ground level and 2 above?
Or, yeah, 4.
Or 4 townhouses?
Yeah.
You were thinking 2-story townhouses? Because you could go either way.
Story,
One-
actually, just one
One
story.
story.
Or do both, because some are accessible
Yeah.
and
Right.
some can be stacked
And
and.
I think diversity would be nice, a little artistic
Yeah.
kind of community that has different kind of stuff.
Right,
Well,
well,
some diversity in size.
I had 2 things. So in Cheyenne, I lived in the older part of town, which was all single-family buildings. But then there were some really well-done 4-plex apartments in brick, and it fit in the community. And then I was just in the avenues of Salt Lake earlier and walking through that neighborhood, and I was really amazed at how well they had brought in even a 12-unit apartment building that fit in with those old structures. So it really seems like the design is the key. And making sure there's landscaping. The landscaping made all the difference in Salt Lake in that avenues, because they have trees and shrubs. So
It is, all of that is very important, 100% design is important, and I think just to clarify for what we're gonna give you, just to manage expectations. So if it's helpful, we won't be developing a rendering to show you exactly what this could look like. This will be a description and show you the numbers and the process about how you might go about doing this and what role the municipality can play in something where you could put together a partnership with someone who could actually pull a project off for you. So this is just to get some ideas on it. And it sounds like it could be more than a single family house. It could be maybe up to 12. Design is important. On the
great.
tenure question, home rent sounds like some mix if possible.
And here's another idea. I mean, what about where some is market value and some is affordable? But make it so that you couldn't tell which was which. So it could be a public-private partnership where, yeah, it's a mixed bag as far as that goes.
can I ask another question about this town? So behind the school, there is a very small development with some Adobe duplexes. You know what I mean? It's behind the elementary school, the old elementary school. And it's a really nice, but they're on their own, they have some yard, but there's a couple duplexes. Anybody
Not the
see that?
Silverleaf place.
No, it's actually right in town. And I can't remember. Dang it.
We'll have to
And
go
it's
try that one.
Adobe, and it's Adobe,
Okay.
Adobe houses, and I believe they're single family, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, McHugh's development.
That's it, but it's really attractive.
Right.
And
He did that on his own. He was an architect here. He now sells real estate out of Delta. And he developed those there specifically.
yeah,
And they were affordable, they're energy efficient. It's really a good use. My only complaint is there's large lots.
yeah, the lots.
Oh, there used to be 4 lots and the one person bought 3 of those lots.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, and is there a duplex on one of those?
No,
I don't
Am I
think so.
reading that
Those are
okay?
single families.
So, I mean, it seems, I'm just thinking that's a really attractive area. So it just seems like some duplexes, and I'd say done right, a 4-plex with 2 and 3 bedrooms.
Right.
Really, the ones I've seen look fine. And here's the other thing about this town. I have driven by those apartments that are down on the south side of Main and Grand constantly. And then one day I went, hey, there's apartments. Because it just doesn't register. Because it's not a negative to me. It's more of we do have some apartment complexes, and then the one next to the physical therapy in the brick.
Yeah, the grocery, by the grocery store too.
Yeah, which really, to me, are relatively innocuous. They're just kind of there and they look okay, so I don't think there's an aversion to a multiple unit apartment building, if it's in the right space.
Yeah,
And
because they're kind of back.
They're
on the
back.
Outskirts of town.
Exactly.
Especially the one off of the end of Grand and Main. I mean, that one,
The
big
dark.
big trees, you can't really see it. The
Right.
one back the other way, they painted it so it looks a whole lot better than it
Yeah,
was
exactly.
years ago.
But I don't,
That really makes the affordable housing thing work. Because as rentals, they're cheaper to start with. And you don't have a very big down payment is the big thing. Now banks are asking for 20%. And I don't know anybody that's got that kind of money that is starting out
for a single family.
for a single family home. It's not there, and the rates are too high. But somebody can develop say a 12 unit, which is really big apartment building. They can develop that and they get a fairly decent rate, and they don't have to put this 20% down. And they can get investors, which makes it affordable. One of the things we want to watch is we don't get what they got in Delta, where it was affordable in concept, in reality it was not. So there's got to be some kind of public, hold your finger on them.
Well, and some of it is private development. If your code allows for certain things and someone comes in and buys property, you can't tell them no.
Well, yeah, and-
So it's something to think as you're updating your code that, maybe there are some things in that laundry list that you don't want to do because they're going to compromise your character, or you only want to do a little bit.
Yes.
Right, and, my big fear is, my big fear is the water tap moratorium is gonna go away and we are gonna be. Yeah, we think there's development pressure, oh my God.
Yeah, I mean,
We are going to
Leslie
have
was-
tons of.
Yeah. But Leslie was definitely updated us a couple times, like, here's the number of people I told no this
Yes.
week, like,
Oh, yeah.
we'll give you another number next week.
Oh, yeah.
So, no, yeah.
Still.
Yes, we are gonna have tons.
What would be really interesting to know is what are people asking for? I don't know what the asks are
For
that are being told no. What kind of construction or are they wanting?
There's a couple that have an empty lot that they have a tap for, they want to do something, but the ones that I seem like I hear the most are wanting to put the sink in the garage or, put a little apartment above the garage. I think a lot of it comes down to ADUs or a guest room for their house, another living space. I think that's primarily most people, that's what they're wanting to do.
And that's relatively reasonable to do in the code.
Yeah. Do our ADU code.
Yeah.
Get that all cleaned up, short-term rentals.
Oh, yeah, you guys would get a run on it.
So guys, I know we're quickly running out of time here, just so I'm clear, so we can kind of hand this off to heirs to do this. So again, it's not going to be rendered, it's a hypothetical piece of land, so you don't have to say it's this site with this number of units. Are you okay if it ends up being modeled solely as a rental project, say a few buildings of no more than 12 units in a building? Would that be acceptable as an example of something that could be built in the future and how you might go about putting that together? If it's not,
I thought I heard a mix was desired.
I know, that's why I'm asking. Would it be
I know you
okay?
haven't got a definitive answer, have you?
Well, because adding mix does have a lot of complications. So if it turns out that for the purposes, because part of this is educational, mainly so you know how you might go about it. If we modeled it as a rental and gave you some caveats around, other considerations to add in a mix, if that was desired in the future, would that be okay if that's how it ended up looking or reading?
Do you need a core design though, then to add on? Do you need to say we're gonna provide a 6-unit rental building? Do you need that prescription
No.
for heirs?
No.
Or can we still be kind of wishy-washy?
You can be a little wishy-washy and we can just figure it out. And I guess if we need more input, we'll come back to you. Again, it's just an example. And so we'll do our best to try to come up with something.
But what you're saying is doing a mixed income is pretty complicated, like that's not a common thing that happens, so it's gonna be hard to
It can
model.
just be a little bit more challenging to model, but it can be doable. Again, certain dollars get tied to certain kinds of projects. And so it depends, then the financing can get really wild to show you more realistic numbers. And so that's why I'm asking if it turns out, if I talk to them after this meeting and it needs to be just a rental project as the example to sort of learn from, would that be okay?
As long as it's not a block building.
Okay.
Okay, we don't want to build to pay on your housing project.
Exactly,
Few rentals in
exactly.
this town, if I remember right. Rentals are very scarce.
Yes.
Yeah, there is a need for more rentals.
Yeah.
Okay, we need.
No, we're good.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
We needed that.
So we were gonna talk about the new housing production goal. This is actually kind of in the overview of the document. And Andrew, I'll let you go over that.
Sure. Yep. So very quickly and yeah, thank you, Ruben. That's awesome. So the new production goal that's in there is a starting place for conversation. Just want to get some initial feedback and reaction. So what we have in there right now is a goal, not that you will necessarily do that, not that you're committing to doing that, but that is something to aim for is 25 to 35 units. Round numbers, it is purposefully a range, so it's not just one specific number. And I just wanted to give you some rationale about how I put that number on the table for you to consider. And that is in the needs assessment, we identified a pretty clear need for a round number of 100 units. Not all of those necessarily need to be put in the town limits. So in that needs assessment, we said, well, let's just assume that half of those get built in town. And let's assume that half of those are rentals and half of those are for sale units to get at the issue of there aren't enough rentals. And so in doing that, we then broke that down 25 and 25, and we did it by our estimate of your current income, the current household income distribution by the AMI category. And so the bottom line is we came up with 31 units are needed below 100% AMI. So I put 25 on the low end, 35 on the high end. And part of that is a few more rentals. If you in the draft housing action plan, we outlined a few more rentals than for sale units, and that was on purpose because building for sale units under 60% AMI is really challenging. So we just said, let's just assume that some of those rentals. And that's how we came to the number. And it to me, after looking at all the numbers, talking to everyone, it seems like a doable goal, and that's where we started. And some of those numbers very closely align with the baseline commitment and the Prop 123 commitment. It also closely aligns with the previous market study that was done in 2018 in terms of the numbers needed by AMI. And so we're not, this isn't anything really new. It's just showing the full range, again, of housing for the community. The market is going to build some of this, but a lot of it, the market can't build because it's not profitable. So I guess just thoughts, reactions to setting a goal in the plan of 25 to 35. Are you confused? That's a lot to cover in 30 seconds.
Confused. Fair. So sums to 24 rental units, building units under 60% of the AMI for homeownership is very challenging. I'm not sure, is what's in the red box?
So that red box, if you add up all those units, that's 31 units. So the first question is, does 25 to 35 sound like a reasonable goal to shoot for?
Of new units.
Is there a timeline on that?
No, so we have basically said in this plan that you would shoot to try to meet as much of this need as soon as possible after the moratorium is lifted. Without a timeline, because of the uncertainty around that, it doesn't make sense to try to put a timeline on it that's very rigid.
One of the things I see there is the units that are 120 to 160% of AMI. That's the low hanging fruit for the private developer. Anything above that, that's profitable. The top end is, we're gonna see some of those, but we're gonna see those go out like in Hidden Valley, places like that. So I think that goal is very doable and it's quite reasonable.
Okay.
And you're talking about the 3 rows below the red box?
No, I like the 30%, 30.1 to 60%.
In the red box.
Okay.
Yeah, in the
Let me
red
look at that
box.
again.
The
Yeah.
higher concentration of homes and rentals are up there in the lowest percentage.
Less than, the less than 30.
And that is not me saying, this should be your goal. This is me saying, this is what people in your community actually make right now. And all I did was say,
Okay,
if you make the assumption that you want to try to put 50 units on the ground and you want half of them to be for rent, half of them to be ownership, this would be what the distribution of units would look like based on what people actually make.
Right.
So all I'm saying is, seems reasonable then. And the other caveat here is that because your market is mostly hitting on the for sale side, the bottom end of the market is roughly around 160% AMI. That's the very bottom end. So as you very rightly pointed out, the market is going to be building from essentially 160 and up. There could be some stuff below that. It's very possible, especially if it's smaller size, but most of this needs to be subsidized.
yes, initiated. It needs to be specifically addressed.
And or have policy corrections, all of the things we've been talking about to facilitate it. So a lot of times plans have a production goal because it's a very easy, tangible thing to go back to and say, where are we on this? So it's not a mandatory thing, but I have found it to be helpful to have something to aim for.
Can I just say, is that in this table?
So
I
that,
remember seeing
so
this.
that table is in the housing needs assessment.
Okay.
So it is not actually in here. What is in the action plan is a little box that says the new housing production goal will be 25 to 35 units at or below 120% AMI. It does add a little bit more detail that, again, is not necessary. It says of these 5 to 10 homes would be for sale, generally priced from 80 to 120 AMI, and 20 to 25 homes would be for rent, generally priced 80% and lower. That is a function of where your market is hitting and what people make. And so again, the details, there's no requirement that you have that many details. You could leave the housing production goal at 25 to 35 under 120% AMI, and that's your goal, and details are not important.
It can sometimes be helpful to have these kinds of details for funders as well. So if you're applying for money to build 24 units, you can say like, that's our goal. We've established this. So it can be helpful.
It can absolutely be helpful, and again, it's a goal to shoot for. If you get down the line and you're having a conversation with a potential partner and they say, we're going to need to, stretch the AMI numbers due to financing or whatever, that's totally fine. This is just a goal. So if it generally, I guess I'm looking for feedback on, does it generally resonate, or are you thinking, no, we need it to be 50 or something else?
This is good.
Could you explain your footnote 1?
Yes.
So I understand the tenure.
So it's out of context. So this table lives in the housing needs assessment. So the housing needs assessment says you need 100 new units in this town in the next 5 years to catch up to current deficits and to keep up with things like job growth and retirements. And in that needs assessment, I then said, well, let's just assume not everyone, you're not going to build all that in town. Okay. So let's assume half gets built in town. And of that, let's assume that half of the 50 is for sale and half of the 50 is for rent. Your current for sale, for rent split is not that, it's closer to 80-20. And so this would then put more rentals on the table because there is clearly a need for more rentals, because of extremely low vacancy rates, rising prices. And so that is that.
Thank you.
Those are how those numbers got put together. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, and if you guys are feeling comfortable, that's great. Okay. I'm good.
Yep.
Excellent.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll wrap up. We're getting the time here. Again, we are taking written comments, so members of the public, or anybody watching or watching later can submit comments. They're mostly open-ended, but until the end of the day on Sunday, the 17th. The link is on the website, or you can email us. I'm sure Tom will field the emails too and send you that link if you have their email. We will adjust the plan based on tonight's conversation and any input we receive. Then we will be compiling the part one, the housing needs assessment, after that's adjusted, and this part into one full document. And fleshing out those kind of other sections where we've said, insert information here. And that will be brought to you guys, to the board, as a full document for your consideration of adoption. We are aiming for the October 24th meeting. That might get pushed back to November, but we're really hoping for that October meeting. And then you guys run and implement the plan.
Oh,
So thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you so much for all your hard work on this. It's really quite impressive.
Good, I'm glad, and thank you for the conversation. It was really helpful to have input and feedback and.
Very helpful, yes.
I really appreciate that you put all of the comments in this. It was educational to read those.
Yeah.
It took forever.
Yeah, it's a little overwhelming when you're like, it's how many pages? And the plan will be, it will be a big document with all of those appendices in there, but we're also doing an executive summary. Aris is gonna help us. We're gonna try to do something graphic. We'll see how graphic it can get. We'll try to have like a 1, 2, maybe at the most 4-page, like,
Thanks.
here's what this whole thing says. So fingers crossed, that's a really helpful thing for you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.